Mom, starting tomorrow, this is how things are gonna work around here. My daughter Jessica's words hit me like a slap as she handed me a printed schedule. Not a suggestion. Not a request. A demand. My own daughter, standing in my own living room, treating me like I'd just been hired as the help. If you don't like it, she continued, her voice ice cold, you're welcome to pack your bags. This house needs someone who actually contributes, not someone who just takes up space. My hands shook as I read down the list. 5:30 a.m. wake up, start coffee, prepare breakfast 6:30 a.m. get kids ready for school 7:30 a.m. school drop-off 8:30 a.m. return home, start laundry 9 a.m. deep clean kitchen and bathrooms 11 a.m. start lunch prep, and on until 10:30 p.m. when I was supposed to be ironing everyone's clothes for the next day. And obviously, her husband Brandon added from the couch, not even looking up from his phone, all this includes covering the household bills. That's what your Social Security is for, right? I just stood there, frozen. This was the same living room where I'd brought Jessica home from the hospital 36 years ago. Where we'd celebrated her birthdays, where I'd held her through her first heartbreak. Now she was looking at me like I was nothing. Clock's ticking, Mom, Jessica said, examining her freshly manicured nails. Brandon already talked to a lawyer. Since we've been here over 2 years and maintaining the place, we've got rights. So either you work for us and stay, or you leave and we stay anyway. The threat was crystal clear. In my own home, the home with my name on the deed, my daughter was blackmailing me. Either become their unpaid maid, pay all the bills, and work myself to death, or get kicked out while they kept everything. Think about it, Jessica continued, blowing on her nails. You're 68 years old. Where else are you gonna go on a $1,200 Social Security check? At least here you've got a roof over your head and you can see your grandkids every day. Unless you'd rather be alone in some crappy studio apartment somewhere. Brandon let out a cruel laugh. Besides, be real. What else are you gonna do with your time? At least this way you'll feel useful instead of just sitting around watching TV like most old folks. My grandkids, 8-year-old Tyler and 6-year-old Emma, were on the floor with their iPads, completely oblivious to the conversation that was destroying my world. Grandma, can you make us a snack? Tyler looked up at me. I'm starving. That was the cruelest part. To them, I was already the housekeeper, the person who cooked, cleaned, and fixed everything. Not the grandma who loved them unconditionally. Not the woman who'd worked 43 years to buy this house. Just the free help who was always available. Look, Mom. Jessica stood up and put a condescending hand on my shoulder. It's not that we don't love you. We do. That's why we're giving you the chance to stay. But things need to change. This house needs order, and somebody has to keep everything running smooth. And why does that somebody have to be me? I managed to whisper. Because you're the one who doesn't work, Brandon replied without looking up. We work, we've got real responsibilities. You just collect your check and don't do anything productive. It felt like he'd punched me in the gut. 43 years as an administrative assistant at the county office. 43 years of getting up at 5 a.m., taking 2 buses to work, saving every penny to buy this house. 43 years of raising Jessica alone after her father walked out when she was 4. Not productive? I repeated, the words choking me. That's not work, Mom, Jessica interrupted with that smile I'd learned to hate. That's just normal stuff people do when they live somewhere. The difference is, now it's gonna be organized with a schedule so everything runs smoother. I looked around my living room. Everything I'd bought with so much sacrifice was ruined. The leather sectional that took me 3 years to pay off? Covered in stains and rips from the kids jumping on it. My grandmother's coffee table? Destroyed by water rings and scratches. On the walls, my family photos had been replaced by Brandon's sports memorabilia and movie posters. My book collection was packed away in the garage to make room for their gaming setup and electronics. Besides, Jessica continued, this'll be good for you. Give you purpose. You've seemed really depressed lately, really bored. Having clear responsibilities will help you feel better about yourself. The manipulation was so obvious it physically hurt. She was selling me my own slavery like it was some kind of therapy. And weekends too, Brandon added, finally glancing up. Saturdays are for deep cleaning, Sundays for meal prep. We're not being mean, we just need this place to run like a real home. A real home? I repeated, anger starting to replace the shock. This isn't a real home. This is the house I bought, that I paid for, where I let you stay when you had nowhere else to go. Yeah, but now we're family, Jessica replied with that twisted logic that left me speechless. And in families, everyone has their role. Ours is to work and earn money. Yours is to keep the house running. It's fair. Emma tugged at my sleeve. Grandma, can I have cookies? The ones in the pantry? In a minute, sweetheart, I said, stroking her hair. No, Jessica interrupted sharply. Emma, Grandma's gonna follow a schedule now. If you want something, ask at the right time. It's 3:30, and according to the schedule, that's her snack prep time anyway. I walked to the kitchen on trembling legs, feeling like each step was taking me deeper into a pit I didn't know how to escape. The schedule was still crumpled in my hand, my emotional death sentence in paper form. When I opened the pantry, my heart sank. 3 stale crackers at the bottom of a box, an expired can of soup, half a bag of rice. The fridge was worse, just Jessica's Greek yogurt, Brandon's craft beer, and 3-day-old takeout leftovers nobody else wanted. Grandma, there's no cookies. Emma shouted from the living room. Coming, baby, I called back, knowing I'd have to make something from nothing, or rather, from the nothing they'd left me in my own kitchen. I heard Jessica's heels clicking toward me. It was like she'd transformed overnight into the queen of the house. Mom, while you're in there, I wanted to remind you you need to hit Costco early tomorrow. I made a list. She stuck a paper on the fridge. About $250 in groceries. Oh, and stop by CVS for the kids' vitamins and Brandon's protein powder. $250. Over a fifth of my monthly Social Security for 1 week's groceries for a family that had decided my money was theirs by right. Jessica, my check doesn't stretch that far every week, I managed to say. Oh Mom, always with the excuses, she sighed dramatically. You know Brandon's saving for us to buy our own place. We can't be spending our income on groceries and basics. Besides, you eat here every day. It's normal for you to chip in. The logic was so twisted it made me dizzy. Brandon was saving for a house while living rent-free in mine, eating my food, using my utilities. And I, the actual owner, had to pay for the privilege of being their unpaid help. What if I don't have enough money? I asked. Then you'll have to prioritize, she said simply. Buy the essentials first. The kids need to eat well, Mom. You can't be selfish with money when there are children in the house. Selfish with my own money in my own house. The word stabbed like a knife. Brandon appeared in the doorway, stretching like he'd just woken up. It was 4 p.m. on a Tuesday, and he was in sweatpants, having been watching TV all morning while I'd cleaned up after everyone. "Hey, could you whip up something good for dinner?" "Tough day at work today," he said, grabbing a beer from the fridge like it was the most natural thing in the world. "Tough day?" I couldn't help asking. "I thought you were home all morning." "I work from home on Tuesdays," he replied with a tone that made it clear I had no right to question him. "Virtual meetings, important calls. Very stressful. That's why I need to decompress after." I looked at the clock. 4 p.m. If he'd worked from home, his day had lasted exactly 3 hours, considering I'd seen him asleep on the couch at 1 p.m. "Also," he continued, taking a long drink, "Jessica and I were talking about some additional ground rules. Like, when we're in the living room relaxing, it'd be better if you didn't interrupt with cleaning noise or cooking smells." "But the schedule says I have to cook at this time," I said, holding up the paper. "Yeah, but quietly. Or cook earlier when we're not relaxing. Just better time management." The contradiction was absurd. I had to follow strict rules that changed whenever it was convenient for them. Jessica came back with that smile that never reached her eyes. "Mom, I also wanted to talk about your bedroom," she said, leaning against the counter like she owned the place. "Brandon and I think you should move to the small room in the back. We need the master because it's bigger and we have more stuff." The master bedroom. My master bedroom. Where I'd slept for 32 years. Where I'd cried after my husband's death. Where I'd dreamed of growing old surrounded by family who loved me. "That room is tiny, Jessica," I said, my voice cracking. "It's perfect for you, Mom. You don't need much space anyway. And this way we can have a bigger closet for our clothes and the kids' stuff. It's more practical for everyone. More practical for everyone." The mantra that justified every humiliation, every loss of dignity. "Plus," Brandon added, "the small room's closer to the kitchen. Makes it easier for you to get up early for breakfast without disturbing anyone." Of course. My new location had been calculated to maximize my usefulness as the help close to the kitchen to serve better, far from the main areas so I wouldn't bother the real occupants. "When do I need to move?" I asked, though I knew I had no real choice. "This weekend would be perfect," Jessica replied cheerfully. "Brandon can help you move the heavy stuff. Well, the few things you'll need. Most of the furniture in the master we're keeping for ourselves. The furniture I'd bought. The solid oak dresser that was my first purchase when I got my first job. The vanity with the mirror where I'd gotten ready for my wedding. The queen bed where I'd conceived Jessica. All of it would be theirs now because it was more practical." Tyler ran into the kitchen with his iPad. "Grandma, my battery died." "Where's the charger?" "In my room, honey." "Go grab it," I said automatically. "No," Jessica intervened firmly. "Tyler, you can't go in Grandma's room without permission. She'll get you the charger when she's done making snack." The humiliation was complete. Even my grandson couldn't enter my room freely anymore. But Jessica and Brandon could decide when and how I should move, what furniture I could keep, which room I was allowed in. "One more thing, Mom," Jessica continued. "Sundays are our family day. Brandon and I want quality time with the kids, so it'd be better if you made plans to go out those days. Go to the mall, visit a friend, whatever. We just need space to be a family." Sundays. My family day too. The day I'd reserved for years to do special things with my grandchildren, baking together, watching movies cuddled on the couch. Now I was being told I was an intruder in my own home. Where am I supposed to go every Sunday? I asked, tears welling up. I don't know, Mom. You must have friends. Go for a walk, go to church. There's lots of things people your age do. The important thing is you have your own activities, that you don't depend on us for entertainment. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in the bed that would soon no longer be mine, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how I'd gotten here. When had I stopped being the mother and become the servant? When had I lost the right to have a say in my own home? I remembered when Jessica and Brandon showed up with the kids 2 years ago. They'd lost their apartment after Brandon got laid off. They arrived crying, hugging me, promising it would just be a few months while they got back on their feet. You're our lifesaver, Mom, Jessica had told me that first night. I don't know what we'd do without you. You're the best mom in the world. The first few weeks were nice, actually. It was wonderful having the house full of life again, hearing the kids' laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent since my husband died. Jessica helped with cooking. Brandon fixed some things around the house. The little ones filled my heart with spontaneous hugs. But gradually, so slowly I didn't notice until it was too late, things changed. First it was Jessica asking me to watch the kids while she job hunted. Then Brandon expecting dinner ready because he was exhausted from interviews. Then it became natural for me to pay for groceries because we all eat here. Every favor became an expectation. Every gesture of love transformed into an obligation. Every time I said no problem, I was signing away another piece of my dignity. At 2 a.m., I heard noise in the kitchen. I got up quietly and found Brandon eating cereal straight from the box, leaving crumbs everywhere on the counter I'd cleaned before bed. Brandon, everything okay? I whispered. He jumped, startled. Yeah, just hungry. No big deal. But that's the last of the cereal for the kids tomorrow, I said, seeing the box was almost empty. Come on, don't be dramatic. It's just cereal. Buy more tomorrow, he replied, leaving the empty box on the counter and heading back to his room. My room. I stood there in the dark, cleaning up his mess, realizing this was my life now, cleaning up after them in silence at 2 a.m. while they slept in my bed without a care in the world. Friday morning, as I made breakfast according to my new official schedule, Jessica came downstairs with more energy than I'd seen in months. She was wearing a new dress I didn't recognize and shoes that probably cost more than a week's worth of groceries. Mom, I need you to watch the kids all weekend, she announced, pouring coffee into my favorite mug, the one with hand-painted flowers that my husband gave me on our 10th anniversary. Brandon and I are doing a couples retreat at that spa hotel downtown. We need to reconnect after all this stress. A couples retreat? I couldn't hide my surprise. With what money? Oh Mom, always worried about money, she laughed that fake laugh. Brandon got a bonus at work. We deserve a break after everything we've been through. A bonus. Brandon, who worked 3 hours a day from the couch, got a bonus. But somehow that money wasn't enough to buy cereal or chip in for bills. Only enough for luxury spa weekends. The kids will be fine with you all weekend, I said, though I knew my opinion didn't matter. Of course they will. You're their grandma. It's natural. Besides, according to your schedule, weekends are for childcare and deep cleaning anyway, she said, checking her phone. Jessica, we need to talk, I said, feeling something break inside me. This can't continue. She looked up with genuine surprise, like she couldn't understand why I'd protest my obviously reasonable fate. Talk about what, Mom? Your attitude lately? Because yeah, I've noticed you're pretty cranky. Maybe you should see a doctor. At your age, Hormones can really mess with your mood. Hormones. My righteous anger at being abused was a medical problem I needed to fix. I'm not sick, Jessica. I'm tired of being treated like an employee in my own home, I said, surprised by my own clarity. Employee? She put on an offended expression worthy of an Oscar. Mom, how can you say that? Your family. In a family, everyone has responsibilities. Ours is to work and earn income. Yours is to maintain the home. Simple. And why do my responsibilities include paying all the bills and working around the clock? I asked, my voice trembling but growing stronger. Mom, nobody said 24/7. The schedule is very reasonable. You've got free time between tasks. You can rest, watch TV, whatever you want in your downtime. I looked at the schedule taped to the fridge. The free time was 30-minute gaps between tasks, enough to use the bathroom or grab water, but not enough to actually rest. And the money, why do I have to pay for everything if you both have income? I pressed. Because we're saving for our future, Mom. We can't spend our money on current expenses when we have long-term goals. You've already lived your life. You had your chance to save and plan. Now it's our turn. The logic was devastating in its cruelty. I'd already had my turn to live, so now my role was to finance their opportunities. My Social Security, earned over 43 years of work, was less important than their dreams. Brandon appeared, dressed to leave, with a smile I found increasingly repulsive. He kissed Jessica's cheek, a gesture of possession and conspiracy that excluded me completely. All set for the weekend, he asked her, ignoring me though I was standing 3 feet away. Yep, Mom's got everything covered. Kids, house, all of it, Jessica replied as if I were just another appliance she'd arranged. Perfect. Oh, one more thing, Brandon said, finally addressing me. My mom's coming Monday to stay with us for a while. She'll need the guest room, so make sure it's spotless. She also likes breakfast early, around 5:30. Hope that's not a problem. His mother. Another person I'd have to serve, feed, and clean up after in my own home. Another mouth to feed with my money. How long is she staying? I asked, dreading the answer. We're not sure. Depends how she feels. She's been really lonely since Dad died, so we thought family time would do her good, he replied, as if my house were a free hotel for lonely relatives. Brandon, your mother and I don't really get along, I said, remembering her dismissive attitude the few times we'd met. Oh, come on, that's ancient history. You need to forgive and forget. She's an elderly lady who needs care and attention. I'm sure once you get to know her better, you'll be fine. Care and attention that I would provide, unpaid and unappreciated, while Jessica and Brandon enjoyed their romantic spa weekend. And Mom, Jessica added, putting on earrings, when mother-in-law arrives, it'd be good if you gave her the master bedroom. We can sleep in the kids' room for a bit. She needs to be comfortable. The master bedroom they'd already taken from me, now they'd give to Brandon's mother. I, in my own house, would have the smallest room while a virtual stranger slept in my bed, used my furniture, expected my service. The weekend was a nightmare beyond my darkest expectations. Jessica and Brandon left Friday at 1 p.m. after giving me detailed instructions for childcare, specific meal times, educational activities, limited screen time, strict bedtimes. It's important you maintain discipline, Mom, Jessica told me before getting into the Uber I'd paid for. Kids need structure. If you spoil them this weekend, they won't respect us when we get back. Tyler and Emma looked at me expectantly, waiting for me to be entertainer, cook, teacher, and babysitter all at once. It wasn't their fault, they were kids adapting to a system where grandma was the person who handled everything. Saturday morning, while making pancakes per Jessica's nutritional instructions, Tyler spilled juice on the living room carpet. A normal accident. But when I went to clean it, I realized we were out of carpet cleaner. Grandma, Mom says when something gets stained, you gotta clean it right away or it's ruined forever, Emma informed me with the seriousness of a tiny supervisor. She was right. Jessica had been very specific about keeping the house pristine. So at 8:30 a.m. on a Saturday, I found myself walking to Target with both kids, spending $40 of my Social Security on cleaning supplies for a stain that could have been handled with soap and water. At Target, Tyler wanted the fancy cereal Brandon ate $9 a box. Emma wanted the organic granola bars Jessica bought, $12 a package. I looked at the prices, doing desperate mental math, knowing every dollar spent was $1 less for my own needs. "Why are you taking so long, Grandma?" Tyler asked impatiently while I compared prices of laundry detergent. "Just seeing which one's better, honey," I lied, not wanting to explain to an 8-year-old that his grandma had to choose between buying him food or her blood pressure medication. When we got home, there was a text from Jessica, "Mom, hope you picked up fresh produce for the week. When we get back Sunday, we need the house perfect and the kitchen fully stocked. Don't want to come home to an empty house after our relaxing trip." Fresh produce. Another $65 I hadn't budgeted. Another 3 hours walking with the kids because Uber money had to go toward food. Another afternoon of my weekend dedicated to serving people enjoying a luxury hotel on savings they'd accumulated thanks to my free labor. Sunday afternoon, as I deep cleaned for Jessica and Brandon's triumphant return, I got a call that changed everything. It was Margaret, my neighbor of 17 years, the only person who truly knew my situation, though I'd never openly discussed it. "Honey, are you okay? You've seemed really off lately," she said with that warm voice that reminded me what normal conversation felt like. "Yeah, I'm fine," I lied automatically, folding Brandon's laundry I'd washed and ironed over the weekend. "No, you're not. I see you leaving super early every morning looking stressed. I see you coming home with shopping bags almost daily. What's going on?" For a moment I wanted to hang up. It was easier to keep pretending everything was normal. But something in Margaret's voice broke through. "Margaret, can you come over?" "I need to talk to someone," I said, surprising myself. "On my way," she replied without hesitation. When Margaret arrived, the kids were glued to the TV. We sat in the kitchen, surrounded by the perfect order I'd created for their parents' return. And for the first time in months, I told someone the truth. I showed her the schedule. Explained about the money. Told her about the threat of eviction from my own house if I didn't agree to be free help. Told her about the tiny room, the family exclusion Sundays, Brandon's mother who'd be served by me in my own bed. Margaret listened in silence, her expression going from surprise to horror to pure outrage. "Honey, this is abuse," she finally said with a clarity that hit me like cold water. "This isn't normal. This isn't what family who loves you does." "But they say it's fair, everyone has their role in a family," I started repeating their words. "No," she interrupted firmly. "In a healthy family, roles are discussed and agreed upon mutually. Nobody imposes unpaid work schedules. Nobody threatens to kick someone out of their own home. That's not love, honey. That's exploitation." The word hung in the air. Exploitation. Not family dysfunction. Not generational misunderstanding. Pure, simple exploitation. But what can I do? I asked, tears finally breaking free. They're right about one thing, at my age, with my check, where else would I go? Honey, look at me, Margaret said, taking my hands. You're 68, not 98. You own your home. You have stable income. You've got all your faculties. You don't need them. They need you. It was such a simple yet revolutionary perspective that it left me speechless. For so long I'd assumed I was lucky to have somewhere to live, I'd forgotten the somewhere was mine. Besides, Margaret continued, do you think this is going to get better? You think one day they'll wake up and decide to treat you right? Honey, this is going to get worse. Every boundary you let them cross becomes the new minimum for how they treat you. She was right. The schedule hadn't appeared overnight. It was the result of 2 years of gradual erosion, small concessions becoming expectations, favors transforming into obligations. What would you do? I asked. I'd kick them out tomorrow, she said without hesitation. And if you don't have the courage yet, at least start setting boundaries. Charge for your services. Demand respect in your own home. Remind them who really owns everything here. We heard a car. Jessica and Brandon were back, tanned and relaxed, ready to resume the routine where I was their personal maid. Honey, Margaret told me before leaving, if you need to talk, if you need help, if you need someone to remind you that you deserve dignity, call me anytime. And think about this, if a housekeeper worked your hours and paid for the privilege, how long would they last? The question haunted me as Jessica and Brandon came in, critically inspecting whether I'd met all their expectations. It haunted me as they complained there was no milk and I hadn't bought enough towels for Brandon's mother. That night, lying in the bed that would soon be taken from me, I asked myself for the first time in forever, what would happen if I just said no? Monday morning arrived like a perfect storm. At 5:15 a.m., the doorbell jolted me awake. It was Diane, Brandon's mother, standing at my door with 2 massive suitcases and the expression of someone expecting royal treatment. Finally, she said without greeting, pushing past me. That Uber took forever. I hope Brandon explained my breakfast requirements. I have a very sensitive stomach and can't eat just anything. It was 5:20 a.m. I hadn't even brushed my teeth, but here I was receiving dietary instructions from a woman who'd invited herself indefinitely. Good morning, Diane, I managed hoarsely. Yes, good morning. This place needs work though, she interrupted, looking around critically. Where's my room? I'm exhausted. My room. The master bedroom already stolen from me, now hers for who knows how long. I led her down the hall, carrying one of her suitcases that felt like it was full of rocks, while she criticized every aspect of my decor. This carpet's worn, she said, pointing to my cherished Persian rug. And these curtains are too dark. At my age I need natural light. You'll change them tomorrow. Change the curtains, with my money, of course, to make my own room more comfortable for an uninvited guest with no departure date. In the bedroom, Diane inspected everything like a drill sergeant. She opened drawers, tested the mattress, and finally declared, this'll do. Though I need all the sheets washed in hypoallergenic detergent. I can't sleep in beds that aren't pristine. Hypoallergenic detergent. Another unplanned expense from my already stretched check. At 5:30 sharp, as Brandon had promised, Diane appeared in the kitchen expecting her special breakfast. She wore a silk robe and feathered slippers, looking like she owned a 5-star hotel instead of being a guest in my house. I need 2 scrambled eggs, very dry, no oil. Whole wheat toast lightly toasted, not burned. Coffee very weak, almost like tea. And fresh fruit, but only perfectly ripe, she recited like I should have memorized her menu. I had no eggs. No whole wheat bread. No fresh fruit. I'd spent everything over the weekend on the kids' demands and cleaning supplies to keep the house perfect. Diane, I don't have exactly what you're asking for, but I can make something similar, I started. What do you mean you don't have it? She interrupted indignantly. Didn't Brandon tell you what I need? Unacceptable. A house without basic breakfast ingredients. Brandon appeared then, dressed for work, with that annoyed look he wore when something disrupted his perfect routine. What's all the noise? He asked, though his mother had been the one shouting. Your housekeeper doesn't have food, Diane said, pointing at me like I was defective merchandise. Housekeeper. She hadn't even pretended I was anything else. To her, I was just hired help. Didn't you shop this weekend? Brandon asked with that reproachful voice he'd perfected. Yes, but I spent the money on what Jessica asked for the kids, I explained. Oh please, always excuses, he interrupted. My mom needs proper breakfast. Go to the store now and buy what's needed. And next time, plan better. Go to the store at 6 a.m. Spend money I didn't have to please a woman who treated me like trash in my own house. With what money? I asked, feeling something harden inside. I already spent everything this weekend. With your Social Security, obviously, Brandon replied like it was the dumbest question. That's what income is for, keeping the house running. My check is already committed for the month, I said with surprising firmness. I don't have money for unplanned expenses. The silence was thick enough to cut. Brandon looked at me like I'd blasphemed. Diane looked like she'd witnessed the most incomprehensible rebellion. Are you telling me you can't buy food for my mother? Brandon asked, voice rising. I'm telling you I don't have available money right now, I repeated calmly. This is incredible, Diane exclaimed to Brandon as if I weren't there. This is the service your family gets? An employee who refuses basic shopping? This can't go on, Brandon said in a tone he'd use with a problem employee. If you can't fulfill basic house maintenance, maybe we need to reconsider living arrangements. There it was again, the veiled but clear threat. Comply or leave your own house. Jessica appeared then, still in pajamas but fully awake from the argument. Her presence immediately shifted the dynamic, like a manager arriving to resolve a labor dispute. What's happening? She asked, though she'd obviously been listening. Your mother refuses to shop for breakfast for my mom, Brandon explained like a kid tattling. Mom, Jessica said with that disappointed voice she'd perfected since adolescence. Is it true you won't buy food for Grandma Diane? The manipulation was perfect. They'd transformed my inability to spend non-existent money into cruel refusal to feed a needy elderly woman. It's not that I won't, I defended. I've spent all my money for the month and have no budget for additional purchases. Oh Mom, always exaggerating about money, Jessica sighed dramatically. How much can breakfast cost? 15, 20 bucks? Don't tell me you don't have $20 to feed family. $20 that would become 40 tomorrow, 60 the next day. A constant drain on my check for a woman who openly despised me. Besides, Brandon added, my mom won't be here forever. Just temporary while she adjusts to being alone. Can't you make this small sacrifice for family? Temporary. The same word they'd used arriving 2 years ago for a few months' stay. The same empty promise justifying every invasion of my space, every demand on my time, every hole in my budget. How long is Diane staying? I asked, knowing I wouldn't like the answer. Not sure exactly, Brandon replied vaguely. Depends how she feels, if she finds activities in the neighborhood, if she adapts to the house routine. The house routine, my routine of serving, cleaning, cooking, paying for the privilege. The routine where I was unpaid domestic help for a family that decided my house was theirs by right. In that moment, standing in my kitchen being scolded for not wanting to spend my Social Security on a woman who treated me like garbage, something definitively broke inside me. It wasn't dramatic enlightenment. More like a dam breaking, first a crack, then steady flow, finally an unstoppable flood of clarity. Okay, I said with a calm that surprised even me. I'll go to the store and get what Diane needs for breakfast. Everyone relaxed immediately, like my surrender restored the natural order where I obeyed without question. But there was something different in my voice. Something they didn't detect because they were too used to assuming my submission. Perfect, Mom, Jessica said with that condescending smile. I knew you'd understand how important it is to make Grandma Diane feel welcome. I dressed quickly and left for the store. But this time I didn't go straight to the grocery section. I went to the pharmacy in the shopping center where I knew there was an ATM, not to withdraw money for Diane's breakfast, but for something entirely different. I withdrew $300 from my savings. Money I'd been saving for emergencies. But I realized this was the biggest emergency of all, the emergency of recovering my dignity before it was too late. With the cash in my wallet, I walked to a law office I'd seen advertised in the community newspaper. It was early, barely 8 a.m., but the receptionist said Attorney Robert Chin handled walk-in consultations starting at 8:30. Is this an emergency? The receptionist asked kindly. Yes, I replied without hesitation. I think it is. Robert Chen was a man in his mid-50s with kind eyes that conveyed experience from seeing all kinds of complicated family situations. Tell me what's happening, Mrs. Anderson, he began, consulting the intake form where I'd written my name. Mrs. Anderson. For the first time in a long time, I said my name with something like pride. Mr. Chen, I need to know what rights I have in my own home. I explained everything, the work schedule, the threats to evict me from my property, the financial exploitation, Diane's arrival without my consent. I talked for 20 minutes straight, like a dam finally bursting. Robert listened without interrupting, taking occasional notes, nodding with expressions ranging from surprise to outrage. When I finished, he leaned back and looked at me with a mix of compassion and professional determination. Mrs. Anderson, what you're describing is economic and emotional elder abuse, he said with a clarity that hit like lightning. Your daughter and son-in-law are committing what's legally known as elder exploitation. But don't they have rights after living there 2 years? I asked, remembering Brandon's threats about consulting a lawyer. In some cases, long-term occupants can claim certain tenancy rights, he explained. But those rights never include exploiting the owner or imposing unpaid labor conditions. And they definitely don't include bringing unauthorized guests without the owner's consent. I felt like a massive weight lifted from my shoulders. For the first time in months, someone was confirming my perception of reality was correct, that I wasn't being dramatic or ungrateful. What can I do? I asked, this time with hope instead of desperation. Several things, he replied, consulting his notes. First, you can notify them in writing that you're terminating any informal housing arrangement. Second, establish clear boundaries on use of your property and financial resources. Third, demand unauthorized guests leave immediately. What if they refuse? I asked, thinking about their reactions. Then we have legal options: eviction proceedings, elder abuse reports. But my experience tells me that when families realize the elderly person has legal counsel and knows their rights, they usually reconsider their behavior quickly. Robert explained he could draft a legal letter that day, establishing new terms for anyone wanting to continue living in my house, terms including paying market-rate rent, contributing equally to expenses, and absolute respect for my authority as owner. "How much does this cost?" I asked, fearing it would exceed what I could afford. "For elder abuse cases, we have special rates," he said reassuringly. $150 for initial consultation, $300 for drafting necessary legal notifications. If it gets complicated and goes to court, we can discuss payment plans. $450, what I spent in 3 weeks maintaining my family. What Jessica and Brandon spent on one spa weekend. For the first time in ages, it seemed like money extremely well spent. "Mr. Chin, I want those letters drafted today," I said, taking the cash from my wallet with hands that no longer trembled. "Excellent decision, Mrs. Anderson. These letters will be ready this afternoon. Would you like me to serve them personally, or do you prefer to handle it yourself?" "Myself," I replied without hesitation. I think it's time I had an honest conversation with my family. Leaving the law office, I felt like a completely different person. Not that I'd suddenly regained all confidence, but for the first time in months, I had a plan. Professional support. Legal rights no one could take away with threats or emotional manipulation. But before going home, I had one more stop. I went to the bank and spoke with the manager about changing access codes to my accounts and setting strict limits on who could make transactions. "Have you had problems with unauthorized access?" the manager asked, an efficient woman who seemed to immediately understand. "Let's just say I want to ensure only I can manage my money from now on," I replied. "Very wise," she said while processing the changes. "Want to review who's authorized on your credit cards too?" Excellent question. Jessica had been using my credit card for months for emergencies never reimbursed. Time for those emergencies to become someone else's problem. "I want to cancel all additional authorizations," I said firmly. "Only I will have access to my accounts and cards." When I finally got home, it was almost 10:30 a.m. 4 hours since I'd supposedly left for breakfast supplies, returning empty-handed but with something far more valuable, an action plan and legal support to execute it. Brandon had left for work, but Jessica and Diane were in the living room, clearly annoyed by my delay. The kids were at school, meaning we'd have privacy for the conversation I was about to have. Finally, Diane exclaimed, seeing me enter. "Where have you been? It's almost 11 and I haven't eaten anything." "Where's the food?" Jessica asked, noticing no shopping bags. "We need to talk," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "All three of us. Right now." Something in my tone must have alerted them because both fell silent, looking at me with a mix of surprise and caution they hadn't shown in ages. "Sit down," I said, pointing to the couch. "This conversation is going to change a lot in this house." "I've been to a lawyer's office," I began, watching their expressions shift from irritation to alarm in seconds. The silence was deafening. Jessica looked like she did as a child caught doing something wrong. Diane seemed genuinely confused, like she couldn't understand why a housekeeper would consult lawyers. "Mom, what are you doing?" Jessica asked, voice trying to sound concerned but unable to hide panic. "Why'd you see a lawyer without telling us?" "Because I wanted to understand my exact legal situation in my own home," I replied serenely. "And it turns out it's very different from what you've led me to believe." I pulled out the documents Robert had prepared in record time, 3 letters on official letterhead addressed to Jessica, Brandon, and Diane. The weight of the paper felt like the weight of my dignity being restored. These are legal notifications, I continued, placing documents on the coffee table. You can read them now or wait for me to formally serve them this afternoon, but the content's the same. Jessica immediately grabbed hers, reading with speed that revealed desperation to understand how serious this was. Diane took hers with trembling hands as I watched her superiority gradually transform into shock. "This is ridiculous," Jessica exclaimed after barely reading the first page. "You can't kick us out. We're your family." "I'm not kicking you out," I replied with surprising calm. "I'm offering you the chance to stay under new conditions, fair and legal conditions." Jessica's letter clearly stated the new rules. If she wanted to continue living in my house, she'd pay $1,200 monthly rent, contribute half of all household expenses, and respect my authority as owner and my right to privacy in my own room. $1,200, she shouted, waving the paper like a cruel joke. "Mom, you know we don't have that kind of money." "Then maybe it's time you found a real job," I replied, using the same condescending tone she'd perfected for me. "Or maybe find a place you can afford with your own income." Diane had finished reading and looked at me like I'd lost my mind completely. Her notification was simpler: she had 48 hours to vacate the property as her presence hadn't been authorized by the owner. "You can't do this," she stammered, voice breaking with indignation. "I'm an elderly woman. You can't throw me on the street like a criminal." "I'm not throwing you on the street," I replied firmly. "I'm asking you to return to your own home or find accommodation where you're actually a welcome guest, not an imposed burden." "Brandon won't allow this," she threatened, standing up with more energy than she'd shown since arriving. "He'll defend his mother." "Brandon can defend his mother in your house," I said, pointing toward the door. "This is my house, and my rules are respected here." Jessica had been silent, reading and rereading the letter like expecting the words to magically change. When she finally looked up, there were tears, not genuine sadness, but the calculated tears she'd used since childhood to manipulate situations. "Mom, how can you do this to us?" she whimpered, voice trying to sound devastated. "We love you. We just wanted to be a close family, and this is how you repay us. Threatening us with lawyers?" "A close family doesn't work with schedules for one member," I replied, standing firm against her performance. "A close family doesn't threaten members with eviction from their own home if they won't be free domestic help." "We never threatened to kick you out," she protested, though we both knew that's exactly what they'd done. "Jessica, I have the list you gave me," I said, pulling the crumpled schedule from my purse. "At the end it clearly says if I don't agree with these conditions, you understand I prefer to find another place to live." "What do you call that?" She was speechless, clearly searching for some way to reinterpret her own written words. Finally she changed tactics. "Okay, maybe we were too rigid with the schedule," she admitted, adopting a conciliatory tone. "We can change that. Be more flexible. You don't need lawyers to solve family problems." "The problem isn't just the schedule, Jessica," I said, feeling stronger with each word. "The problem is you turned me into your unpaid housekeeper. You spend my social security like it's yours. You invite people into my house without permission and expect me to serve them." Diane, who'd been listening with increasing agitation, finally exploded. "This is insane. Brandon said he lived with a loving family. He didn't say he'd be living with a crazy old woman who thinks her house is a hotel." "Exactly," I replied, looking directly at her. "This is not a hotel. It's my house. And in my house, guests are invited, not imposed. But I'm Brandon's mother, she shouted, as if that gave automatic rights over my property. And I'm the owner of this house, I retorted with firmness I didn't know I possessed. Your family relationship with Brandon doesn't give you rights over my home. Jessica had been silently calculating, probably doing math on what it would actually cost them to live independently. When she spoke again, her voice had a desperate tone I'd never heard. Mom, let's be realistic, she said, trying to sound rational. We can't pay $1,200 rent plus expenses. You know that. And you can't live alone at your age either. We need each other. I've lived alone before, I replied. I lived alone 10 years after your father died, before you arrived. And I lived very well, thank you. But now you're older, she insisted, playing the age card as last resort. What if you get sick? What if you need help? I'll hire professional help if needed, I said, an idea that just occurred but sounded perfectly reasonable. There are many senior services that charge for their work and provide it with respect and professionalism. You're going to pay strangers instead of accepting help from family, she asked, personally offended. I'm going to pay for professional services instead of being exploited by people who take advantage of my love for them, I corrected. There's a very important difference. The phone rang. Brandon, probably checking that his mother was being properly attended. Jessica ran to answer, speaking in urgent whispers, clearly communicating a family crisis was unfolding. While she talked, Diane approached me with an expression changed from indignation to something like respect. First time she'd looked at me like a real person instead of talking furniture. Look, she said with considerably softer voice. Maybe we can work something out. I don't have to stay in the master bedroom. I could sleep on the couch? Diane, I interrupted gently. The problem isn't where you sleep. The problem is you came to my house uninvited, expecting to be treated like an honored guest indefinitely. That's not fair to either of us. Brandon arrived home 20 minutes after Jessica's call with an expression I'd never seen. Not his usual condescending arrogance. Something more dangerous, the face of a man realizing his parasitic world was about to collapse. We need to talk, he said with controlled voice that didn't fool me. Jessica told me about these ridiculous letters from some hack lawyer. Attorney Robertson isn't a hack, I replied calmly. He's a lawyer specializing in tenant rights and elder protection. And these letters aren't ridiculous. They're perfectly valid legal notifications. This is betrayal, he exploded, dropping all pretense of diplomacy. After everything we've done for you, keeping you company so you wouldn't be alone, turning this empty house into a home full of life. The reality distortion was so extreme it almost made me laugh. According to their version, they'd been doing me a favor living rent-free in my house, eating my food, using my services, spending my money. Brandon, you're 43 years old, I said with hard-to-maintain patience. If you want a house full of life, you can buy your own house and fill it with all the life you want. But not at my expense. We've been saving to buy our house, he shouted like that justified 2 years of exploitation. But it's impossible to save when there are so many expenses. You don't understand how expensive raising 2 kids is. You're right, I admitted, surprising him. I don't understand because when I raised Jessica, I paid all her expenses with my own money. I didn't look for an elderly person to support me. Diane, observing from the couch, decided to intervene with her version of maternal support. Brandon, I understand you're confused, but he's a good father and good son. He doesn't deserve being treated this way by a woman your age who's clearly losing her mind. Losing my mind? I repeated, fury igniting in my chest. For defending your rights in your own home? For threatening family with lawyers instead of solving problems like civilized adults? Diane replied with practiced moral superiority. Civilized adults don't impose work schedules on family members, I countered. Civilized adults don't threaten to evict the owner from their own home. Brandon had been pacing, clearly calculating options. When he stopped, he had that expression he wore playing his strongest card. Okay, fine, he said with a smile not reaching his eyes. If you want to play with lawyers, we can play with lawyers. Because it turns out we've been consulting about our rights too. What rights? I asked, though I suspected where this was going. Rights of tenants who've lived on a property over 2 years, he replied triumphantly. Rights of parents raising kids in a stable home. Rights of a family maintaining a property deteriorating from lack of care. Exactly the threat Robert warned me they'd try. The difference was now I was prepared to face it. Brandon, I said with a calm that clearly unnerved him. I suggest you show those legal consultations to your real lawyer, because mine assured me no court in this country would grant tenant rights to people who haven't paid rent and who've been financially exploiting the owner. Brandon's expression changed immediately. Obviously, his legal consultations had been internet searches or conversations with friends, not real professional advice. Besides, I continued, pulling out my own ace, my lawyer informed me what you've been doing is called elder exploitation and it's a federal crime. So if you want more lawyers involved, go ahead. But I warn you the legal consequences for you will be much more serious than for me. The silence was absolute. Even the kids who'd arrived from school during our discussion and were listening from the hallway remained completely still. You're threatening to sue us? Jessica asked in a small voice she hadn't used since being a teenager. I'm not threatening anything, I replied. I'm explaining the legal consequences of your actions, the same consequences my lawyer explained to me this morning. Tyler appeared at the living room entrance with his backpack still on, confused expression on his face. Why's everyone yelling? Why is Grandma crying? Indeed, Diane had started crying, not tears of sadness but tears of rage and humiliation from someone realizing they'd completely lost control of a situation they thought they'd mastered. It's okay, sweetie, I told Tyler, approaching to hug him. The adults are having an important conversation about how we're going to live in this house. Are we leaving the house? Emma asked, appearing behind her brother with wide eyes. My granddaughter's innocent question broke my heart. But it also reminded me why I was doing this. These kids deserved to grow up in an environment where family relationships were based on love and mutual respect, not exploitation and manipulation. That depends on your parents, I replied honestly. If they decide they want to stay here respecting house rules and contributing fairly, they can stay. If not, they'll have to find another place. What rules? Tyler asked with direct childhood curiosity. Rules like all adults living here have to work and contribute to expenses, I explained. Rules like no one can force other family members to work without rest. Rules like we all deserve to be treated with respect. Brandon looked at me with an expression that would have been intimidating a week ago but now seemed simply pathetic. You're confusing the children with adult drama? The children were already confused, I countered. Confused seeing their grandma treated like a housekeeper. Confused hearing their parents talk about kicking grandma out of her own house. Now at least they're hearing there's another way to live as family. Jessica approached her children and hugged them in a gesture that would have been tender if it hadn't been clearly calculated to generate pity. Kids, go to your room and do homework. Adults need to finish talking. When the children left, the living room atmosphere became even tenser. Like we were all waiting for someone to make the next move in a chess game where rules had completely changed. "Okay," Brandon finally said, adopting a negotiating tone. "Let's say you're serious about all this. Say you really want us to pay rent and contribute to expenses. How much time do you give us to organize?" "The letters specify 30 days, I replied, consulting the documents. 30 days to decide if you accept the new conditions and start complying, or 30 days to find another place to live." "And my mother?" he asked, pointing to still sobbing Diane. "Your mother has 48 hours, I said firmly. "She has no housing agreement with me, authorized or otherwise. Her presence was an imposition, not an invitation. You can't throw an elderly woman out with 2 days' notice." Brandon protested. "I can and I will," I replied, surprising myself with my determination. "Your mother has her own home. If she doesn't want to live alone, she can find an appropriate place for seniors, or stay with relatives who actually invited her." 3 months later, I woke up in my own bed in my own room at 6:30 a.m. because I wanted to, not because a schedule demanded it. The silence of the house didn't bother me. In fact, it was the most beautiful sound I'd heard in years. The sound of peace. Diane had left on the second day, exactly as the legal notice specified. She left with dramatic tears and threats of never speaking to me again, as if that were a loss and not a blessing. Brandon had to borrow money from his brother to pay for a hotel while she decided what to do. Eventually she moved into a senior apartment complex where, I later heard, she constantly complained the staff wasn't as efficient as I'd been. Jessica and Brandon tried every tactic during those first 30 days. First came total denial, insisting everything was a misunderstanding, we could resolve things as family without lawyers. When that didn't work, they tried emotional guilt, constantly reminding me I was missing watching my grandchildren grow up, as if watching them grow required being their unpaid 24/7 babysitter. Then came anger. Brandon yelled for 3 hours one night, calling me selfish, cruel, a terrible mother and even worse grandmother. Jessica cried, begged, even brought the kids to ask me to change my mind. But for the first time in years, I stood firm. Robert had prepared me for each tactic, and I had calm, legal answers for all their overflowing emotions. "The children are going to suffer because of you," Jessica told me during one last manipulation attempt. "The children are going to learn that healthy family relationships are based on mutual respect, not exploitation," I replied, using Robert's exact suggested words. The final phase was most revealing. During the last week before they left, both Jessica and Brandon started treating me with exaggerated courtesy that was almost more insulting than their previous abuse. Suddenly it was Mrs. Anderson and please and thank you so much for everything. Like they'd suddenly remembered good manners existed, but only when they needed something. "Mom, we hope you understand we always loved you," Jessica told me the morning they left. "Sometimes families just have misunderstandings." Misunderstandings. 2 years of systematic exploitation reduced to a simple misunderstanding. As if it had been confusion about who should take out the trash, not a deliberate campaign to turn me into their free housekeeper. But they were gone. They moved into a 3-bedroom apartment across town, a place costing exactly $1,200 monthly plus utilities. Apparently when it came to paying an unfamiliar landlord, they did have the money. Only when it came to paying me, their family, their money wasn't enough. The first few days after their departure felt strange. The house felt enormously empty after 2 years of constant noise, urgent demands, perpetual stress of serving others. But gradually that emptiness transformed into something completely different, freedom. I could eat breakfast when I wanted. Watch TV shows I liked. Decide what to cook based on my own cravings, not nutritional demands of 4 different people. Spend my social security on my own needs and even treat myself to small luxuries I'd forgotten existed. The first time I bought fresh flowers for my dining room table, I cried right there in the grocery store. They were $18 that previously would have gone to fancy cereal or hypoallergenic shampoo for uninvited guests. Now they were $18 I could spend on something making me happy for the simple pleasure of making myself happy. Margaret had been a blessing throughout the process. She'd helped me maintain resolve during the hardest moments and become a true friend. Now we had lunch together twice weekly, went to the farmer's market Saturday mornings, and started taking watercolor classes at the senior center. "Don't you miss the noise of the children?" she asked one afternoon while we painted landscapes. "I miss my grandchildren," I replied honestly. "But I don't miss being their unpaid babysitter." There's a very big difference. And it was true. Tyler and Emma visited every other Saturday, an arrangement we'd established after many tense negotiations. At first Jessica tried using visits as pressure, suggesting if I didn't give in on some separation agreement aspect, visits could become more complicated to coordinate. Robert had advised keeping all visit communications in writing, through him, until Jessica realized she couldn't use her own children as emotional blackmail weapons. Eventually we reached a civilized agreement. Kids came every other Saturday from 9 a.m. to 5 p.m., and I took them to fun activities I could now afford since I wasn't subsidizing 4 adults' lifestyle. The difference in my relationship with Tyler and Emma was remarkable. When I wasn't responsible for them 24/7, didn't have to worry about their mealtimes, discipline, constant entertainment, I could simply be their grandma. I could spoil them a little, laugh with them, listen to their school stories without being distracted thinking about what household chore I had to do next. "Grandma, why don't you live with us anymore?" Emma asked during one early visit. "Because adults need their own spaces to be happy," I explained. "Your mom and dad need their own home where they can make their own decisions, and I need my home where I can make mine." "But you still love us," she insisted with genuine concern that broke my heart. "I love you more than anything in the world," I assured her, hugging her tight. "And because I love you so much, I want you to learn that people who love each other treat each other with respect and kindness. They don't take advantage of each other." Tyler, older and more observant, understood the situation with surprising maturity. "Mom and Dad made you work a lot, didn't they, Grandma?" "Yes, honey," I admitted. "But now we're all learning better ways to be a family." That morning, 3 months after the big change, I woke up with a feeling I'd completely forgotten, positive anticipation. Not anxiety about what demands awaited me during the day, but genuine curiosity about what good things I could choose to do. Robert had called the previous week to inform me Jessica and Brandon had officially withdrawn any legal claims to my property. Apparently their consultations with real lawyers confirmed what I already knew: they had no legal rights over my house, and any attempt to establish such rights would only result in elder exploitation charges. "How does freedom feel, Mrs. Anderson?" Robert asked with that warm smile I'd come to appreciate. "It feels like waking from a very long nightmare," I replied. "It feels like remembering I'm a person, not an object." That morning I got up when I wanted, ate breakfast how I wanted, and dressed to go to my new favorite activity, senior ballroom dancing classes I'd discovered at the community center. At 68, I was learning to waltz and foxtrot. I'd made new friends and was rediscovering parts of myself I'd forgotten existed. As I prepared to leave, I looked at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back no longer had that perpetually tired, anxious expression she'd worn the past 2 years. Her eyes were bright, her back straight, and she had something she'd lost without realizing: dignity. Leaving the house, I locked the door and walked to the bus stop with firm steps. It was my house, my life, my decision. And for the first time in a very long time, those words didn't scare me. They filled me with pride. Because I'd learned the most important lesson of my life: it's never too late to reclaim your self-respect. And once you reclaim it, no one can take it away again. No matter how much you love them or how much they say they love you, true love never requires you to sacrifice your dignity. And true family never asks you to become less than you are so they can be more. So what about you? What would you do in my shoes? I'd really love to hear your thoughts in the comments. And if this story resonated with you, if you know someone who needs to hear it, please share it. Sometimes we all need a reminder that we deserve to be treated with respect, especially by the people who claim to love us most. Big hugs, and remember, you're never too old to stand up for yourself.